In the pages of history, few figures have ever commanded the same level of fear and awe as Goliath, the giant from Gath. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a towering, unstoppable force, a living weapon designed to terrify and conquer. Standing at an enormous 9 feet 9 inches tall, Goliath's very presence on the battlefield was enough to send shivers down the spines of even the bravest warriors. His armor alone weighed over 125 pounds, and his weapons, massive and brutal, seemed better suited for a creature out of myth than for any ordinary man. Every step he took echoed like thunder, each movement a terrifying reminder that Israel was facing something far beyond human strength. For 40 days straight, morning and evening, Goliath stepped into the valley of Elah and issued the same bone-chilling challenge: choose a man and have him come down to me. If he can fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. It wasn't just a challenge to Israel's military power. It was an assault on their identity, their courage, and more than anything, their faith. Goliath's words weren't random threats. They were calculated psychological warfare. He wasn't just trying to win a battle. He was trying to crush Israel's spirit before a single sword was swung. And it was working. The Israelite army, trained and armed, lined up day after day, only to fall back the moment Goliath stepped forward. The sheer sight of him, his armor glinting in the sun, his shield bearer in front, his voice booming across the valley, struck fear deeper than any weapon could. These weren't cowards. These were experienced soldiers, seasoned fighters. But none of them could bring themselves to face the impossible. What made Goliath so terrifying wasn't just his size or his strength, it was what he represented. He stood as a symbol of hopelessness, of battles that seem unwinnable, of challenges so overwhelming they paralyze us. Worse yet, he mocked not just Israel's army, but their God. He dared to blaspheme the name of the Lord, taunting, "Where is your God now? Will he save you?" This wasn't just a physical showdown. It was spiritual warfare. It was fear versus faith, pride versus belief, darkness versus light. And the silence from Israel's camp only made things worse. No one stepped forward, not even King Saul, who had once led with courage. For 40 days, Goliath stood unchallenged, and each passing day made his dominance feel more complete. The battlefield had become a place of humiliation for God's people, a valley echoing with unanswered insults. This wasn't just a giant. This was a crisis of faith, and it demanded something far greater than a sword to overcome. No one could have expected that Israel's answer to Goliath would come in the form of a young shepherd boy. David wasn't a soldier. He didn't wear armor or carry a sword. He didn't arrive at the battlefield with the intent to fight. He was just running an errand for his father, bringing food to his older brothers who served in Saul's army. But in God's plan, ordinary moments often lead to extraordinary purposes. What seemed like a simple delivery of bread and cheese turned into a divine appointment that would change the course of history. David came from the quiet hills of Bethlehem, where he spent his days tending sheep, facing wild animals, and worshiping God under the open sky. These weren't meaningless routines. They were the very things that prepared him for the battle ahead. While Israel's soldiers were paralyzed by fear, David had been quietly building courage. He had fought off lions and bears, not with military training, but with raw determination and trust in the God he served. When David arrived at the camp and heard Goliath's taunts, something stirred in him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, not just the giant's arrogance, but the silence of God's people. How could no one respond? How could the army of the living God stand there and let this Philistine mock his name? David's reaction wasn't pride, it was righteous anger. To him, this wasn't a fight about size or strength. It was about defending God's honor. As David began to speak out, asking why no one was stepping up, he was quickly met with criticism, even from his own brother. Eliab accused him of arrogance and claimed he had just come to watch the battle, but David's heart was pure. "Is there not a cause?" he replied. His words, simple yet bold, cut through the fear that had gripped the camp. He wasn't there for glory. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just believed that someone needed to stand up for God, for truth, and for the people of Israel. Word of David's boldness spread quickly and soon reached King Saul. At first, Saul couldn't believe what he was hearing. A boy willing to fight Goliath. It sounded ridiculous. But when David stood before him and spoke about how God had delivered him from the paw of the lion and the bear, Saul began to see something deeper. This wasn't reckless confidence, it was faith, a deep, tested, unwavering trust in the power of God. Saul offered David his armor, but David turned it down. It didn't fit. It wasn't his. Instead, David chose what he knew: a sling, 5 smooth stones, and a heart full of courage. He wasn't trying to be someone else, he was just being faithful to who he was and the God he served. And with that, the shepherd boy walked toward the battlefield, ready to face the giant, not with fear, but with faith. The moment had come. After 40 days of silence and fear, someone finally stepped onto the battlefield, not a warrior in shining armor, but a shepherd boy with a sling in his hand and faith in his heart. David didn't hesitate. As he walked toward Goliath, the contrast couldn't have been more striking. On one side stood the Philistine giant, massive, armored, snarling with confidence. On the other was David, young, unarmored, and seemingly outmatched. To anyone watching, it looked like a suicide mission. But David wasn't relying on appearance or strength. He was relying on God. When Goliath saw David approaching, he laughed in disbelief. "Am I a dog?" he mocked, "that you come at me with sticks?" He cursed David by his gods and threatened to feed him to the birds and wild animals. His voice echoed through the valley, filled with contempt. But David didn't flinch. He didn't back down. Instead, he stepped forward and declared words that would shake the very soul of Israel and its enemies. "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David wasn't speaking from fear. His voice rang with authority. He knew the battle wasn't his, it was God's. He boldly declared that the Lord would deliver Goliath into his hands, and that all the world would know there was a God in Israel. The soldiers who had trembled for weeks now watched in stunned silence. A boy had said what none of them dared to believe. As Goliath advanced, David ran to meet him, not ran. With a smooth stone in his sling and years of practice behind him, he released it with perfect precision. The stone flew through the air and struck Goliath square in the forehead, the one place unprotected by armor. In an instant, the giant fell. The ground shook as his body hit the earth, and a gasp rose from both camps. It was a shocking, brutal, and decisive act, one that sent the Philistines into panic. Their champion was dead, their confidence shattered. They turned and fled, running for their lives as the Israelite army, now reignited with courage, charged after them. David's victory wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. He had stepped into a moment of fear and transformed it into faith. He had proven that God doesn't need numbers, strength, or armor to win battles. He just needs someone willing to trust him. The shepherd boy had defeated the giant not because he was stronger, but because he believed that no one who defies the living God can stand. In one single moment, the impossible had happened. The giant had fallen, and a nation had found its courage again. As the dust settled over the battlefield and Goliath's body lay still, new questions began to rise. Who was this giant really? How could one man strike such fear into an entire army? Was Goliath just an unusually large warrior, or was there something deeper, something ancient, behind his terrifying presence? To understand the full weight of who Goliath was, we have to look back far beyond the battlefield, back to a mysterious and unsettling chapter in biblical history. The Nephilim. The Bible describes Goliath as a Gittite, a native of the Philistine city of Gath. But his size, strength, and reputation hint at a darker, older lineage. Many scholars and theologians believe Goliath may have been a descendant of the Nephilim, an ancient race first mentioned in Genesis 6:4. That passage reads, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." These offspring were described as heroes of old, men of renown, but their fame came with a price. They were giants, both in stature and in their corruption. According to biblical tradition, the Nephilim were born from a forbidden union between fallen heavenly beings and human women, a crossing of boundaries that God never intended. Their existence brought chaos, violence, and widespread corruption to the earth. It was part of what led God to send the great flood in Noah's time, a cleansing of the earth from the deep evil that had taken root. Yet Genesis hints that some form of the Nephilim continued even after the flood, and also afterward. This phrase suggests that their legacy somehow survived. And that brings us back to Goliath. He wasn't just a large man, he was a living remnant of this corrupted line. His defiance of God, his supernatural size, and the fear he spread all echo the traits of the Nephilim. And Goliath wasn't alone. Scripture mentions other giants from Gath, possibly his brother's men like Ishbi-Benob, Saph, Lami, and an unnamed warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. These weren't coincidences, they were part of a bloodline, a legacy of rebellion. These giants, descendants of the Nephilim or the Anakim, weren't just physical threats. They represented spiritual opposition figures who challenged not only Israel but the authority of God himself. Every time they appeared, they stood as towering reminders of defiance and fear, and every time they were defeated, it was a declaration that no force, no matter how ancient or intimidating, could stand against the living God. Goliath's death was more than the fall of a powerful enemy. It was a spiritual victory over a legacy that stretched back to the earliest, darkest days of human history. In bringing down Goliath, David didn't just win a battle, he struck a blow against an ancient evil. One boy with faith stood against a line of giants and proved that God's power always prevails over fear, rebellion, and even the deepest roots of darkness. Goliath's death wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Though the mighty giant had fallen, his bloodline had not. The Bible tells us that Goliath had brothers and kin giants who, like him, carried the same legacy of fear, strength, and defiance. These weren't just family members. They were symbols of a continuing battle between Israel and the forces that stood against God's people. Each of these giants would eventually face defeat, but not without testing the faith, courage, and unity of Israel once again. One of the most dramatic moments came years later when David, now older and wearier from many battles, found himself face to face with another giant, Ishbi-Benob. Like Goliath, he was massive and armed for war. His bronze spearhead alone weighed hundreds of shekels, and he carried a brand new sword, confident that he would do what his fallen brother could not kill David. In the heat of battle, David grew faint. For a terrifying moment, It seemed the giant might succeed. But then came Abishai, David's loyal warrior and nephew, rushing in at just the right moment. He struck down Ishbi-Benob and saved the king's life. That moment shifted everything. David's men, realizing how vital his leadership was, swore an oath. "You must never again go with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." David's physical strength may have been fading, but his spiritual light, his faith, his leadership, his connection to God was more important than ever. His men knew they had to protect him, just as he had once stood to protect them. The battles didn't stop there. Goliath's other relatives, giants named Saph, Lami, and an unnamed warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, each rose up, only to fall to David's mighty men. These were not victories of brute strength alone. Each one was a spiritual win, a reminder that God still reigned over Israel, and no matter how terrifying the enemy, he would not let his people be overcome. These giants were more than warriors. They were echoes of an ancient curse, a lingering threat from the days of the Nephilim. Every time one appeared, it was as if the past was trying to reclaim the future. But Israel, now rooted in deeper faith, stood its ground. And each victory didn't just secure safety, it reignited belief. These were not just battles of flesh and blood, they were battles of the spirit. The names of these giants became warnings, whispered in Philistine cities as legends of defeat. But the names of David and his men became songs, celebrations of bravery, faith, and God's deliverance. The war against giants wasn't just about size. It was about what they represented: fear, rebellion, and hopelessness. And every time one of them fell, it proved again and again that with God, no enemy is too big and no battle is truly lost. The story of David, Goliath, and the giants of Gath is more than just an ancient battlefield account. It's a living, breathing reminder of what it means to face overwhelming odds and still believe that God is greater. These weren't just stories of physical conflict, they were lessons about courage, obedience, identity, and trust. When Goliath stood before Israel, he wasn't just a massive warrior. He was the embodiment of fear, doubt, and everything that convinces us we're not enough. And yet, one young man armed with faith and a sling stepped forward and changed the course of a nation. David's victory wasn't about skill or strategy. It was about perspective. Everyone else saw a giant too big to fight. David saw a target too big to miss. He didn't measure Goliath against himself, he measured him against God. And that shift in mindset is something we still need today. Our giants may not carry swords or wear armor, but they show up in other ways: anxiety, addiction, failure, fear of rejection, hopelessness, financial hardship, broken relationships. They taunt us like Goliath did, whispering that we are not strong enough, not worthy enough, not good enough. But like David, we're not called to fight in our own strength. We're called to remember who fights for us. That same God who delivered David is still delivering people today. And like David, we often won't win by using the world's tools. We win by using what God has already placed in our hands: our faith, our story, our trust, our obedience. David didn't need Saul's armor. He needed to be himself and believe that God would do the rest. Even more powerful is the lesson that our faith can ignite faith in others. When David defeated Goliath, the army of Israel, paralyzed for 40 days, rose up with new strength. One act of obedience shifted the atmosphere. One step of faith awakened a nation. That's the ripple effect of courage. You never know who's watching, who's waiting for someone to stand up and believe when no one else will. Your battle could become someone else's breakthrough. And let's not forget the giants after Goliath, his brothers, his kindred. They kept coming, and they still do. Just because we win one battle doesn't mean we're done. Life will continue to throw challenges our way, but each time we have a choice: give in to fear or stand in faith. David's legacy teaches us that the enemy may be strong, but God is stronger. That faith doesn't mean we'll never be afraid. It means we choose to move forward anyway, trusting that God is already at work. So, what's your Goliath? What are you facing today that feels too big, too impossible, too much? Remember David. Remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about trusting God more than your fear. And remember this most of all: the battle is not yours. It belongs to the Lord. If He could use a shepherd to defeat a giant, He can use you too, right where you are, just as you are.